number 8.
Legal notice, Town of Evans. Please take notice that the Town Board of the Town of Evans, Erie County, New York will hold a public hearing on June 7th, 2017, at 7:10 p.m. at the Evans Town Hall, 8787 Navy Road, Eagle, New York, 140006, for the consideration of the adoption of proposal law number 8 of the year 2017, which will amend local law number 8 of the year 1987, commonly known as the zoning law, and any amendments thereto to proposed revisions to the Town Code, Chapter 200 zoning. A draft copy of the proposed local law will be available for inspection by any interested person in the office of the town clerk during normal business hours, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and the town's website, townofevans.org. All parties and interested citizens shall have an opportunity to be heard by the town board at the public hearing to be held before it said. However, the town board of the town of Evans will not propose the conflict.
Okay. Motion to open the public hearing.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Councilman Feldman?
Aye.
Councilman Mackel?
Aye.
Supervisor Hopper?
I'm going to turn it over to Brian Culpa and Molly from Clark Lee Patterson, our town engineers, who will go over and present about waterfront mixed-use district. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Supervisor. I apologize again to the town clerk. Do you want me to use the microphone?
Do you want to use the microphone? Yeah, yes, you could possibly.
I saw everybody outside and I said, wow, they're really passionate about land use.
I have no
That's
idea.
every planner's here. Okay,
I have no
that's
idea.
good, that's good. Well, you should be, I mean, this is related to your waterfront, so it's important.
It's my backyard.
So I want to talk for a minute just about how we got to the point where we're working on a land use change in a new zoning district, and then talk about the zoning district. So a few years back, this town passed an LWRP, which is a local waterfront revitalization plan. And that was accepted by New York State, the State Department. When you did that, you formed a legally binding contract with New York State that said the state could not overrule local decisions on your waterfront as long as you complied with the program and the plan that you set forth. As part of that program and plan, there was included a language that said we're going to take the neighborhood mix, or the neighborhood business use, which involves places like the Mickey Rat's site or the Castaway site, those types of establishments, and we're going to get rid of that neighborhood business use, and we're going to change to a waterfront mixed use. So again, that was predates any work we've done here, but that was, and it may have been a prior town council, but you formed that legally binding contract with the state.
Well, they did it.
The town has a
I
legally
hear you.
binding contract with the
I
state.
know.
And so therefore, you have it's necessitated that you create this waterfront mixed-use district. The waterfront mixed-use district, and I apologize, if you're in the back of the room, I know some of these will be a little hard to see. But the purpose of the waterfront mixed-use district, as discussed in your waterfront land use or your LWRP, your local waterfront revitalization plan, included creating a diversity of use along the water, regulating development that to be contextual. That means development that fits your waterfront, not just development that could be plunked anywhere. Enhances your waterfront assets, preserves foundational components of your waterfront.
What does that mean?
It means that we want to take things like the town park, things like public access points, and preserve those components. And then the last piece of this was to entice development, both public and private, right? So right now, you have a development pattern that's called out there that makes it very hard for anybody to say, I want to do redevelopment in that area. And some of the sites that you have are underutilized. And again, this is straight from your LWRP. So the sites that we're talking about here are sort of three major areas. or sort of the southwest corner, which is the sites around Castaways, and it's limited to only a few actual parcels. The second component is the sites along the road and actually inhabiting sort of the Mickey Rats area. And then the third has to do with the St. Columban's parcel. The St. Columban's parcel is not zoned neighborhood business. It's actually zoned R2, which is a low density residential, which basically says all you can do with this site is knock it down or only use it for single family detached housing.
Can you bring that up, blow it up some?
I can't. Yeah, that's the blow-ups of the three areas. So as discussed in the LWRP, there are areas that are referred to as Bunny Creek, Delaware Creek, and Pike Creek. So we have had a number of public meetings. I recognize some faces from some of those public meetings in the past, where we've gone through a number of things. First was the type of zoning that the town wanted to implement, right? You're used to seeing traditional zoning, which is a lot of language on paper, does a really good job of regulating setback and parking, but it does a really, excuse my French, crappy job of, there's no other way to say it, of telling people, you know, this is what the character of this area should be, and this is what we're looking for. The second part of this conversation was then, if we do go forward with something called a form-based zoning, where we are using illustrations to tell people this is what we're looking for in terms of development, in terms of use, then what should it look like? And again, we had a number of meetings, both out in the other sort of main public area of this building and then in this room. And we went through a lot of images and sort of tried to gain, you know, what people wanted to see, what they didn't want to see, what they liked, what they didn't like. And the planning that is on the website and before the board tonight is an outcropping from all of that. And it includes some real basic stuff, right? So setbacks and setbacks from the street and how a building should look on the street. You know, do we want a building to look like a Dollar General in this area? Do we want it set back with a field of parking in front of it? Or do we want the buildings to come up to the street and form sort of a walkable waterfront community? How should the buildings that are located along the water meet the water? You know, we obviously don't want them to be crept up too close to the water, but we also don't want them to be crept up too close to the street where they form sort of a strange water edge. So setbacks and minimum setbacks are included. 15 minimum front yard setback from the road, 30 yard maximum front yard setback from the road, 140 to 170 foot front yard setback from the water. The next items that this zoning covers includes what do you do on a lot that can accommodate multiple buildings. So the goal of the zoning is to create mixed use. That means that you want some combination of residential but always commercial on the property. And that's embedded in the code. There always has to be a commercial component. So if there's multiple buildings, do you allow some to be solely residential? Do you make them all have commercial? In this case, so far what we've heard is that there was a favor towards making sure that there's commercial on every site, that only if there's commercial on a site could that site then support a residential use. That residential use could be a hotel use, it could be an office use, there's a lot of different sort of secondary uses, but the primary concern is that the ground floor be an actual business use. So then we get into site planning and design. And one of the goals of this planning is to say, hey, stuff like this is appropriate. We want buildings that are clustered so we don't have building driveway, building driveway, building driveway, building driveway, because when we're down near the water, we want to be able to walk past several buildings and not always have to be interfered with cars coming in and out of those spaces.
You can
So-
set that kind of space anyway.
Well, again, so the idea here is to cluster buildings and provide access paths between buildings. So site planning and design, in the planning code, if you look at it online, it actually tells you what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. Appropriate design includes sort of a series of pedestrian paths that take you from the parking lot to the front of the buildings, and tries to avoid sending people, walking across lawns and grass areas. Ultimately, it always puts parking behind the main use, but never between the main use and the water. Other things that made sense that we had to incorporate into this zoning included seasonal outdoor seating, an appropriate way to do seasonal outdoor seating, so that there are appropriate barriers so that the seasonal outdoor seating can meet the water, so that seasonal outdoor seating is enclosed in areas that prohibit vehicular interaction with people sitting and enjoying their food or their beverage. With driveways and access, again, we're trying to avoid that sort of multiple driveway, multiple slot, scenario. We want buildings clustered. We're in the zoning encourages communal use of driveways off of secondary roads instead of main roads. It also talks about stormwater retention and the right way to do stormwater retention and the wrong way to do stormwater retention. It asks for bioremediation, it asks for green infrastructure, it asks for water to be absorbed into a site and not to be displaced into large holding areas. In terms of site infrastructure and facilities, the zoning asks for appropriate screening in front of dumpsters and secondary use items like receiving bays, right? It says, hey, we don't want the receiving bay to face the main road. We would like the receiving bays to be behind. We want them screened. Again, with site infrastructure and facilities, it asks for permeable conditions. It asks for appropriate guardrails and appropriate plantings to absorb stormwater and to avoid just dumping stormwater into a storm system or into the lake or into any of the creeks. Inappropriate utility structures are discussed. Appropriate screening for utility structures, including vegetative and built screens, are encouraged. Overall applicability, again, if the building fronts the water, it has to give priority to the water. If the building is on the opposite side of Old Lake Shore, then it needs to give priority to the street. Parking screening, parking lots that are allowed on the side of buildings or turn where you have two major roads, those have to be screened. That may include built-in vegetative screens. It includes appropriate, basically ways to condition the parking edge so that you don't feel like you're in a sea of asphalt walking among cars. That parking also, as we said, shared parking is encouraged. Parking offsets are given if shared strategies can be provided. Site landscaping, foundation landscaping, and screen and buffers are discussed and required. Site landscaping, this is an example of inappropriate, sort of just overgrown. This is appropriate landscaping that allows views of the building, allows for drivers to have good views, creates a sense of destination and place. Foundation landscape treatments include, basically adjacent, when you're adjacent to residential areas, you need to have property boundaries that are screened so that you're not just confronting residential zoning districts with heavy commercial use. Building form and massing, there's a lot of talk about building character. That's sort of it's really sort of a refined waterfront character that we're looking for. Lots of glass and openness on the ground floor, traditional pitched roofs everywhere, good signage, and a pedestrian feel. The type of character, building form, and massing is discussed. The building mass basically includes setbacks after the first, is that 26 feet? After the first 26 feet, the building has to step in, and then it has to step in after the next story. So it's basically 4 usable stories that are created. The encouraged Cape Cod sort of aesthetic with opportunities for rooftop seating and rooftop access if possible. Discouraged, these are all inappropriate, or these sort of, this could be anywhere, it doesn't really have a character defined moment. I have to say that if you look at your current zoning, you don't get into character content at all, so you run risk of having inappropriate buildings put up. Inappropriate housing and residential versus appropriate ways to deal with residential, facade breaks, making sure that materials are dealt with and specified, and making sure that there is a character that's more like the appropriate view on the left than the inappropriate view on the right. Making sure that the building actually has what we call a water table, which is basically a foundation cover, either brick or stone or some differentiating material, so that you don't have a monolithic building material striking the sidewalk that creates sort of that, just sort of landed here feel or character. Ultimately, we want windows to be used. Lots of transparency. Transparency is actually specified. There are minimal transparency thresholds on the ground floor. Roofs and cornices. Cornices are necessary. We're telling the developer that it's not okay to put up buildings that lack detail and character. You have to provide all those traditional components. We care about doors and entrances and where your main doors face and how your main door looks and how it's designated and how you designate secondary entrances and where they fall. We're avoiding lack of consideration for good building materials and lack of consideration for good building detail as inappropriate mass. Signage is important to have a traditional and residential flavor, or getting away from sort of those just kind of typical, could land anywhere, could be transit road, could be mile strip, sort of old post sign style signage. Signage that is differentiated in terms of quality building materials, and signage that projects off of buildings is encouraged, as are awning signs, appropriate sign locations, appropriate monument signs that fit and can add character to the area. Lighting is dealt with, right? Sort of traditional lighting feel. Lighting that doesn't flood over the property line and interfere with residential around it. Lack of floodlights, and really trying to get away from that sort of boxed, hyper-modern look as well. So site lighting shall improve safety. Every floodlight, any building light has to be shielded. Lit bollards are encouraged. Downlighting is important. Appropriate lighting examples include sort of cut-off and full cut-off fixtures. Again, we're looking to stop light pollution and light seepage. Inappropriate lighting is basically light that interferes with all the neighboring properties, and that's it in a nutshell. I think there's some 150 pages or something in there.
Brian said, we have had several public meetings on this where we've invited the public to input on what they'd like to see, how they would like us to develop the waterfront. And we had all our boards together as well, our zoning, planning, our town boards, our economic development. They all had input along with the public, so it was a collaboration between the public and the boards that represent the town. So this is a public hearing for that, so we want to hear from the public. We're not passing the resolution tonight to adopt it. We want to hear from you to see what some of the inputs you have. If you have any suggestions, have we missed anything? Have we not considered things? And then we'll take that back to a board and look at but we do have the one parcel that is waiting to be rezoned is St. Columbus. It is a confirmed almost sale. They're waiting on to see if it will be rezoned, because as it is zoned right now, it is not zoned for their use or what they are planning to do with the site. But the good news to us as taxpayers is it's going from a tax exempt piece of property to a taxable piece of property, which is good news. It's the diocese was open to hear what the town we had to say. Roberta, myself had conversations with the head of the Catholic diocese in charge, and just pleaded with them to sell it to some organization that we could change the property to tax exempt. I did have probably 4 very solid offers on the property, one offering a cash and over the asking price. That they did choose this one because they believe it will create some type of tourism for us, and a focal point for our community. So we're excited to have that. That will be rezoned to this mixed water use. It's the only thing that can be done at that site. So that's one of the sites that we're excited to have fit this waterfront mixed use zone. So I am going to ask if, first we have a list here, we'll go by the list. So Dave Sipple. And remember, if you can stand up and state your name and the address for the town clerk, and then if you talk in the mic, because we have some people here that have a little trouble hearing, right?
Sure. My name is David Sipple, at 368 Lakeside. I just had 3 items. Item number 1 was I received a call late last night from a person who received a notice about the mixed use, waterfront mixed use. Evidently received it in the mail. And he was surprised, he didn't know anything about it. And he asked me if I would come down here tonight and just say that he didn't know anything about it. And I was going to ask the board to table any sort of vote on it, but I see you've already done that. So this gives him the opportunity to come down and ask questions himself.
Dave, there was all the public hearings were advertised. We had a public hearing on the planning board and probably 3 public meetings on it, all of which advertised. So, and we did, from the residents that did receive the letter was very vague. I didn't read the letter, it came from the planning board. So I think we're gonna, and we did, as the rezoning up here, we did, I think, notify even more of the residents around it. So it was, because it's near their property. So we went beyond what we were required to do.
Okay.
So,
Okay, and I was aware of the meetings because I attended several of them. And I did receive a copy, a draft copy of some documentation. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things with that. I did mention it before. Probably around the 5th page, there's a fold-out map. And that zoning map doesn't really show all of the mixed use that's in this, it's in the community, and it did not agree with the LWRP map, zoning map, which is number 4C in the LWRP. Let's see. The other thing that I was concerned about is on the fold-out map, it does indicate that there will be a waterfront boardwalk connecting amenities and also connecting to the town park. And I don't think that a boardwalk along the lake is appropriate because we have a constantly changing lake level. And even with respect to the setbacks of 140 feet and so forth, sometimes the lake is high and it would encroach on that 170 feet, and other times it's low. So I think that needs a little bit more work. Other than that, I was very impressed with Brian's presentation tonight, and thank you very much for doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, are you in favor or opposed? It has to be, or you have no.
I'm in favor
Dave,
of,
Tom Quinn is asking, because you have to.
okay,
Can you drop the screen so Lynn can, just if somebody has a question.
okay.
Poor Lynn, she's out. And you don't have to, if you just wanted to make your comments. And I would just, if you just touch base with Roberta too over there, because you had the fold out, you had some particulars. I want her to take notes, and I think she missed that first one.
Oh, sure, we can get together.
Okay.
Right, sure.
Okay.
Am I opposed? If it pertains to a business use, yes. If it pertains to residential, currently residential usage, I would be opposed to this. I believe that people who have an existing business, if they need to put up an extra storage shed or something like that, it should conform to the design that they have on the property and not necessarily redesign so that it looks like something from New England. But other than that, I'm in favor.
Thank you.